Chapter 8. Cambridge Years. In the early 1900s, few women went to college, and no deaf-blind woman had ever completed college. But Helen was determined to be the first, and she knew just where she wanted to go: Radcliffe. It was the sister school of Harvard University, just outside Boston. Radcliffe was considered the top women's college in the United States. It would be an amazing accomplishment for Helen to become a student there. Helen learned of a way that she could gain admittance to Radcliffe. There was a school, the Cambridge School for Young Ladies, that prepared young women for Radcliffe. Annie went to see Arthur Gilman, the head of the Cambridge School. She pleaded with him to take Helen as a student. Surprised by the request, he said that he would think it over. Helen and Annie had no choice but to wait. His answer would determine Helen's future. It was during this time that Helen's father died. Helen wanted to rush home for the captain's funeral, but her mother wouldn't permit it. It was summer, when many contagious diseases thrived in the South. Helen's mother did not want to risk Helen's health, so Helen had to stay in Massachusetts and grieve for the captain. Then, at last, Gilman gave his answer. Helen was accepted. For the first time, Helen felt afraid of going to school. What if she did not do as well as the other girls? What if she failed? At first, Helen seemed like any other student at the school. She and Annie lived in Howell's house, one of the dorms. Helen made friends. Some of the girls learned the manual alphabet so they could talk to Helen. She joined them in games and took long walks with them. Helen studied English, history, Latin, and German. But few of the textbooks were in Braille. Annie had to read each one to her. Annie also had to look up words Helen did not know, even if the words were in German or French. Helen worked very hard. She studied day and night. Helen wanted to finish school in 3 years. Was she working too hard? Most students spend 5 years at Mr. Gilman's school. Stubborn as always, Helen refused to back down. The constant studying took its toll. Helen became ill. Her sister, Mildred, now also attended the school. Mildred noticed that Helen seemed weak and always tired. Mrs. Keller became alarmed. Was Annie pushing her daughter too hard? Mrs. Keller met with friends of Helen's. Should she take Helen away from Annie? Mr. Gilman thought so. Helen and Annie had been together for almost 10 years. Wherever Helen went, Annie did too. Perhaps it was time for Helen to make a break with the teacher. Helen did not want teacher to leave. Helen felt she would be lost without teacher. Mrs. Keller wavered. She was not sure. In the end, Mrs. Keller sided with Annie. Helen would remain with Annie. Helen withdrew from Mr. Gilman's school, and she and Annie went to live in Wrentham, Massachusetts. There, Helen worked with a private tutor. Nothing would stop Helen from entering Radcliffe. In June 1899, Helen took the test for Radcliffe. She was already 19 years old. Many freshmen at Radcliffe were only 18. Helen was afraid that she had failed, but she passed with good marks. Finally, on July 4th, 1899, the acceptance letter came. The fireworks for the holidays seemed to be just for Helen, but the dean of Radcliffe suggested that Helen wait a year before entering. To Helen, that seemed like forever. In September 1900, Helen entered Radcliffe as a freshman. In the wonderland of mind, Helen said, I should be as free as another. Helen's dream had come true.